All right, so today we're going to continue our discussion with the Articles of Confederation. We have this idea that this powers and weaknesses of the Articles are, there's problems, and there's problems of what to do with the states and the weaknesses that are going on. No power to tax. Federal government can't get any money. Congress can't make anybody obey laws. You have no national court system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the colonists and the founding fathers really believed that they had some problems. So they wanted to meet to revise and amend these articles. And that's where we're going to start for today's notes. So they set up a couple meetings to basically kind of discuss this and settle some of these disputes. The first one's called the Mount Vernon Conference. It was in 1785. Only Maryland and Virginia were there. They settled some differences, not real well attended. Obviously, they just settled the differences between those two states, not all 13 colonies. The bigger conference was in 1786. This was the Annapolis Convention, which Annapolis, of course, is in Maryland. And this was poorly attended. 5 states only were there, and including no Maryland. Came and made their own convention in their own state. So very interesting. And at this point, they called for a bigger convention in Philadelphia. They really wanted Congress to push to have everybody there, made sure that all the states were represented. So this was in Philadelphia and called the Philadelphia Convention. So as we go to the Philadelphia Convention, again, the sole purpose of this convention was to revise and amend the Articles of Confederation that they already had. They knew they had problems, but they didn't want to dissolve it. They just wanted to revise and amend these Articles of Confederation. Scheduled to begin May 14th, hot and humid. You think about Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, it's about the same geographical latitude line as Iowa. So you can understand what May in Iowa is like. Think about how hot and humid it is. They had no air conditioning. They're wearing wigs. They're wearing full clothing. They're not wearing tank tops and shorts. So it's pretty hot and humid. Virginia and Pennsylvania are there, which is really good because those two states could actually start talking about a lot of things they wouldn't talk about. And Virginia is going to be a very big part of this as they go through the Philadelphia Convention. And May 25th, it then does start. Again, you got to remember the time period here. They're not taking a flight into Philadelphia, from Atlanta, Georgia. It's slow going. It takes people a while to trickle in to be there. And again, I forgot to mention this before with the hot and humidity part. This is kind of a secretive meeting. They wanted to keep kind of what was going on here and the changes they're making to be a secret. So they would close all the windows and all the shades and try to make sure this was a secret and so they could have good conversations and not have to be bothered by anybody else. So they have a quorum and on May 25th, a quorum of 7 states. That's definition there is the least number needed to conduct official business. So basically this is 1 over half. So if you have 13 states, 7 would be 1 over half. If you had 15, then it'd be 8, of course. Okay, same for your weight. All right. And George Washington is elected president of the Congress, not of the United States at that point. Secrecy is very important, as I said before. In fact, it was so important that Benjamin Franklin liked to go visit the local establishments in Philadelphia. So they would send a bodyguard with him. And when he started talking too much, that bodyguard would then escort him out of that establishment and take him home. That's how secret they wanted to keep this. And shortly thereafter, Edmund Randolph proposes the Virginia Plan. So this is a 4-hour presentation. We're going to find out James Madison authored most of this. But Edmund Randolph proposes this plan because he was a great orator. Orator is speaker. James Madison was diminutive. He was not very tall, 5'3", maybe. Squeaky voice, small, squeaky voice. And if you're trying to present this great plan that's pretty remarkable, he's kind of a genius. you don't want somebody up there that's going to have a squeaky voice and not hold the room. Edmund Randolph could hold the room. He was a great speaker, so that's why they let him propose the Virginia Plan, which ended up being a 4-hour presentation. So here's a Virginia Plan. It's also known as a large state plan. Virginia was a large state in the colonies at the time, or the state at the time. So that's why it's called a large state plan. It benefits them. They broke it down into 3, notice that 3 branches. Right now the articles, of course, only have 1 branch. So they proposed this to have 3 branches, a legislative branch, executive branch, and a judicial branch. And their idea in the legislative branch was 2 houses. Remember, right now they only have 1 house in the Articles of Confederation, unicameral. So they're trying to go with 2 houses in the legislative branch, where the HRs, the House of Representatives, will be chosen by the people, and then the Senate would then be chosen by the people in the House of Representatives. Okay, so this is a very interesting tidbit here for the Virginia Plan. The executive branch then would be a single executive, would be chosen by Congress, so that House and that Senate would choose the executive, and they'd be 1 7-year term. Now, if you think about this a little bit, you think about like a parliamentary government. That's kind of the way Great Britain was with the parliamentary, not where they are now, a parliamentary government where you have the parliament choosing the executive out of that Congress, and that's the way they would do it here. And then the judicial branch would be chosen by Congress as well. So notice that all the power is in Congress here. They do have 3 branches, but it's not separate powers. There's no checks and balances here. So it's kind of driven by Congress having the power. And if you notice, in the House of Representatives is chosen by the people. So if they're chosen by the people, and then the executive and judicial branches are chosen by the House and the Senate, you can see that the power is in the people here. And Virginia, having the most people in the states, per state, would have the most power. So this would favor the large states without a doubt. So the convention is amazed at this, wowed by this plan that all of a sudden that they brought up, because again, the sole purpose of the convention was to, yes, that's correct, revise and amend the articles. So then the small states get together and they come up with their own little plan, and it's called the New Jersey Plan. This is proposed by William Patterson. It's also known as a small state plan. It too has 3 branches of government: the legislature, executive, and judicial branches. The legislature would be unicameral, where each state would equal 1 vote. So unicameral again is 1 house. The executive branch would be a single executive chosen by the electoral. And the judicial branch would be chosen by the executive branch, and legislative would have to approve those people. So you can see here, we'll talk about the electoral in a little while, but the electoral is very interesting. It's very interesting right now in today's government and society as well. So here's the small state plan, the New Jersey plan. Again, William Patterson proposed this. Again, 3-branch government. Again, everybody's amazed that we have these 3 branches. Again, the sole purpose of the convention, Philadelphia Convention, was to, yes, revise and amend the Articles of Confederation, not come up with an entire new government. So with that being said, we have these 2 plans out there: the New Jersey plan, which favors a small state plan, and the Virginia plan, which favors the large states. So we have to have some type of compromise, because you can't just have these plans favoring one particular state over the other. So they come up with a compromise, and that compromise is known as the Great Compromise. It was proposed by Roger Sherman. It's also known as the Connecticut Compromise. Roger Sherman proposed the Connecticut Compromise. Again, it has the 3 branches: legislature, executive, and judicial, as you see. The bicameral will be the legislature will be bicameral. The House of Representatives will be elected by the people, apportioned by population. So apportion means basically based on population. where you would have so many people would get you one particular representative. This many more would get you another representative. The Senate then would be equal. You have equal number of votes, 2. So you'd have 2 senators from every state. And they wouldn't be chosen by the House of Representatives. They'd be chosen by each state's legislative branch on their own. Okay, so Iowa legislature, if we were there at that time, would have 2 people they would send to be in the Senate, in the federal Senate. Okay, so you notice here that the Senate portion of this is conducive and favored by the small states, where the House of Representatives portion will be favored by the large states. The executive branch in this proposal would be a single executive chosen by the Electoral College. So the Electoral College basically is where we have these people that are going to basically go vote for the president, the single executive, based on how we vote in our states. So, that's the electoral. Today, a lot of people say we don't need the Electoral College. If you look back in the last couple elections, Hillary Clinton beat President Trump by straight numbers, but she did not get enough electoral votes, which is 270, I believe, you have to get to be president. Look back, same thing. Al Gore beat President George Bush back in 2000, and he again did not have the most votes, but he got the most electoral votes. So it's kind of a controversial type thing that we have going on right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward. The judicial branch then would basically be chosen by executive branch, and then the legislature approves this. Okay, so I, as the president, would nominate somebody to be the judge, Supreme Court judge, and then the legislative would then approve or not approve, and I'd have to nominate somebody else. So this is the Great Compromise, or known as Connecticut Compromise, where they kind of put them all together. So we still have some things that need to be hashed out in this. Their idea was each representative would equal 6,000 citizens. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the legislative branch. We have the slavery issue, obviously. North and South differed on the slavery issue, so they come up with a 3/5 compromise, where this basically says that all slaves were counted as 3/5 of a vote. The South wanted them to count as all of a vote, but not let them vote. Where the North, they wanted to say, no, if they're people, if you're going to count them as a vote, then they should be able to vote. Well, the South said, no, that shouldn't be the case. And so all slaves then were counted as 3/5 of a vote. This would end up being abolished with the 13th Amendment later. The Commerce Compromise, this is where Congress would regulate interstate commerce. Again, one of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was that there was no regulation of interstate commerce. So this compromise does go ahead and have the federal government regulate that interstate commerce. Then the slave trade compromise, obviously the northern states did not want the slave trade to continue, the southern states did. They basically came up with a compromise saying that Congress could not act on the slave trade for 20 years, but the South could still use the slave trade. And then that would end up being banned in 1808, 20 years later, and deemed as piracy. So that was kind of their compromise and their given to allow that slave trade to happen still. So the last slide here, completion on this, September 7th, 1787. 3 delegates refused to sign, including Edmund Randolph, who proposed the Virginia Plan. And more importantly, the Congress recommends that each state act on this grand experiment. So yes, that means they sent it out on Twitter and Snapchat and wherever else, Facebook, they all put it, and I'm just joking, no. Basically, they sent them to newspapers. That's how they got the word out. They sent it out to the newspapers would print it, that way people could see it and see what was happening, and then they could vote on this eventually, and Congress was behind this. Again, even though the sole purpose of this Philadelphia Convention was to revise and amend the Articles of Confederation, they end up approving this new government and wanted each state to act on it. So the Philadelphia Convention basically ends up becoming